My name is Claire Henderson, and I live in a quiet neighborhood in Charleston, South Carolina. The house I moved into 3 years ago isn't the biggest or the fanciest on the block, but it's mine, and that has always been enough. I've spent countless weekends fixing up the place, painting shutters, planting flowers, adding a little wooden bench under the oak tree in the backyard. But my favorite project of all has been the garden I built along the side of the house. Rows of tomatoes, cucumbers, herbs, and roses filled the little patch of land, and tending to it always gave me a sense of calm and purpose. On one particularly warm Saturday morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sun had just started to rise, casting golden streaks of light across the neighborhood. I slipped into my old gardening jeans, a faded t-shirt, and pulled on my wide straw hat before heading outside with my gloves and watering can. The smell of damp soil was soothing, and the chirping of birds made it feel like the perfect beginning to a peaceful day. I knelt by the rose bushes, pruning carefully, humming a tune I didn't even realize I knew by heart. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. At first, I thought it was one of the neighborhood kids running by, maybe chasing a ball or heading toward the park down the street. But the steps slowed, steady and deliberate, until they were right behind me. I froze for a moment, my hands still resting in the soil. Slowly, I turned my head. Standing there was a man I hadn't seen before. Tall, with dark hair and a kind of rugged look that suggested he spent more time outdoors than inside. He wasn't dressed like a jogger or a passerby. He wore jeans and a button-down shirt, sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. For a brief moment, I was startled. My heart pounded, and I wondered why someone would be standing silently behind me instead of saying hello from the sidewalk. "Sorry," he said quickly, raising his hands a little in apology. His voice was warm, almost disarming. "I didn't mean to startle you. I just moved in next door, and I thought I should come over and introduce myself." Relief washed over me, though my heart was still racing. I pulled off one glove, wiped my hand on my jeans, and stood up. "Oh, well, welcome to the neighborhood," I said, managing a polite smile. "I'm Claire Henderson." He returned the smile, extending his hand. "I'm Daniel Miller. Just moved into the house on the corner. I guess we're neighbors now." Daniel had one of those firm handshakes that felt both confident and genuine. As we stood there, I couldn't help but notice the way his eyes, hazel, with a touch of green, seemed to study everything around him, like he was taking in the garden, the house, even me, all at once. "Nice garden you've got here," he said, glancing at the rows of vegetables and the blooming roses. "I've never been good with plants. I think I'd probably kill a cactus." I laughed a little more than I meant to. "It takes patience. And water. Lots of both." That was the beginning of a conversation that lasted longer than I expected. What started as a quick introduction turned into Daniel asking about the neighborhood, where the best grocery store was, whether the coffee shop on Main Street was any good, which days the trash truck came by. I found myself answering his questions easily, even adding little stories about the town, the neighbors, and how I came to live there. Eventually, Daniel mentioned he had recently gone through a rough time. He didn't go into detail at first, just said he needed a fresh start and Charleston seemed like the place to find one. There was something in the way he said it that made me pause. I didn't pry, but I understood. I had moved here for a fresh start too after my divorce. The more we talked, the more I realized Daniel wasn't just a polite neighbor stopping by out of obligation. He seemed genuinely interested in connecting. Before long, I was offering him a basket of fresh tomatoes I had just picked that morning. He accepted with a smile, promising to bring something in return once he got settled. After that first encounter, Daniel and I began running into each other more often. Sometimes I'd see him unloading boxes from his truck, and I'd wave from the garden. Other times he'd catch me walking my dog, Max, and stop to chat. Soon, it became routine for him to walk over in the evenings, just as the sun was setting, and sit on the bench under the oak tree while we talked about everything from books to music to the little quirks of small-town life. It was during one of those evenings that he opened up more. He told me he had gone through a divorce as well. His marriage had fallen apart after years of trying to fix something that wasn't meant to be fixed. He admitted he had felt lost for a while, and moving here was his way of finding some kind of peace. I listened, relating more than I expected. I shared my own story, how I had been married for nearly 10 years before realizing I wasn't happy, how difficult it had been to start over on my own, and how the garden had become my therapy. Daniel didn't judge or offer cliché advice. He just listened, really listened, and that alone made me feel understood in a way I hadn't in a long time. Days turned into weeks, and soon it wasn't unusual for Daniel to lend a hand in the garden. Despite his claim of having no green thumb, he was surprisingly good at digging, lifting heavy bags of soil, and even building a small wooden trellis for my climbing plants. Sometimes we worked in comfortable silence, sometimes we joked, and sometimes our conversations went deeper than I expected. The neighborhood began to notice too. Mrs. Thompson, an elderly lady who lived across the street, teased me one afternoon when she saw Daniel carrying a crate of gardening tools. "Looks like you've got yourself a helper, Claire," she said with a wink. I blushed, waving her off, but deep down, I couldn't deny I enjoyed having him around. Then one day, something happened that changed everything. I was out in the garden again, trimming the roses, when I heard the familiar sound of footsteps behind me. This time, I smiled before even turning around, knowing it was Daniel. But when I turned, I saw a worried look on his face instead of his usual easy smile. "Claire," he said, his tones serious. "Do you smell that?" I paused, sniffing the air. At first, all I noticed was the usual scent of flowers and soil. Then, faintly, I caught its smoke. Not the light, pleasant kind from a barbecue, but thick and sharp, the kind that made your throat tighten. We looked toward the street, and sure enough, smoke was rising from the house 2 doors down. Panic surged through me. That was the Parker family's home. They had 2 young kids. Without hesitation, Daniel dropped the gardening tools he was carrying and ran toward the house. "Daniel, wait," I called, but he was already halfway there. I followed, my heart pounding. By the time I reached the sidewalk, Daniel was at the front door, banging and shouting for the Parkers. Within seconds, Mr. Parker stumbled out, coughing, carrying one of the children. Mrs. Parker followed with the other child, tears streaming down her face. But then she screamed. The dog! The dog's still inside. Without thinking, Daniel bolted into the smoke-filled house. My stomach dropped. Seconds felt like hours as we all stood outside, the smoke growing thicker. Then, finally, Daniel emerged, coughing hard, his shirt covered in soot, but with the Parker's golden retriever in his arms.